So our second panel of the morning is focusing on interviewing tips and hiring myths. So we briefly touched on this in the last panel, but there are many different theories about what is required to get and obtain a faculty position, and also about what you can't do. So today we have 4 assistant professors that don't fit in the box, but yet are still successful. So we'll discuss how they navigated the system and got their current positions. So I'm going to, like I did last time, allow them to give really brief introductions, meaning you get 2 to 3 sentences to kind of describe yourself, your path, and where you are now. So compound complex sentences, I have a feeling, are about to appear. And we're going to do this in alphabetical order. So Laura, you're first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Bradley. I'm an assistant professor in polymer science and engineering at the University of Massachusetts-Amherst. I'm originally trained as a chemical engineer. I received my PhD from the University of Southern California, after which I did a 2-year postdoc. In the second year, I interviewed for faculty positions and then started the next fall as faculty.
Nick, you're up.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nick Durr. I'm an assistant professor in biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. I'm in my 5th year now. I came to Hopkins from a startup company, actually. I wasn't intending on going into academia, but I did a translational postdoc, started a company from that and did that for a couple of years, and then found a position at Hopkins where I teach capstone design. So the industry experience comes in handy, and also run a research group in biomedical optics.
Danielle?
Great. Thanks, Andrea, for having all of us. My name is Danielle Mai. I'm an assistant professor of chemical engineering at Stanford University. Before Stanford, I had done my PhD at the University of Illinois and a 3-year postdoc at MIT, generally in the area of polymer physics and biopolymers. So I started at Stanford in January.
Helen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Helen Tran. I'll be starting as an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in January 2021. Before that, I was an undergrad at Berkeley, PhD at Columbia, and then postdoc at Stanford. And I'm generally interested in conductive polymers for electronics.
Great. So we're going to start with a couple of questions and then open it up to Q&A to our broader audience. So the first question is, what is the biggest hiring myth that you've heard out there? And we'll start with Laura. You're muted.
Thanks. No matter how long we're in a virtual world, the mute button is still tricky. In terms of hiring myth out there, when I think about that question, what I think of first is sort of the struggle that is expected of the interviewing process. And I originally thought, and my peers thought, that it was going to be a grueling process, which it is in some aspects, but that we would be technically grilled constantly, when really the interview process was really just about having good science discussion. And so for me, that was like the biggest myth that I realized from my experience through the interview process, that it's really about having good conversation and kind of showing up and being ready to have good discussion. And there's a way to enjoy the process. It's quite enjoyable, and you'll learn a lot.
Helen?
On the similar lines, I felt that one myth that I was told, like, you need to know everything about every professor that you're meeting. And I had some things going on, so I just had no time to research everyone. Like, I knew like all the polymer people in the department, like the reasons for why I was applying for that school. But then there would be some professor, I was like, I know you're very famous, I have no idea who you are, but let's have that conversation. We were able to talk about different things, but I didn't have to know, like, I read your recent paper, or the paper that just came out last week, I was really into it. So I didn't have time to do that, and gave them the opportunity to tell me about what they're doing. And so that was a really big myth for me.
Nick?
Yeah, so I guess my answer builds off both Laura and what Helen were saying. When I was going into it, I thought for many positions, they might search for the absolute best biomedical engineer they could find on the market. But really, it's a lot more about fit in many places than you might expect. And I think one of the ways you find that fit is through these conversations, finding really good connections with some people, but not necessarily blowing everyone away that you meet with. So the fit is really important.
So last but not least.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that's been said so far. I agree with all of that. Interviewing was pretty fun. It was tiring, but you get to meet a lot of people and have a lot of great conversation. One of the myths that I thought about was that some candidates will think of the student meetings as being the easy part of the day. And I advise that if a department goes through the effort to put together a student lunch or a meeting with the students, to take that very seriously, because that input will be solicited from the students who you're interacting with. So it's also a great opportunity to get to know kind of the other side of the department and what's how do students join groups? How do they perceive the prestige of the department or the functionality of the department? And so that was like a really important type of meeting for me. And if anything, it was sometimes a bit concerning if that meeting didn't exist on a schedule in any of the visits.
Great. So what was your biggest surprise that happened during an interview? So why don't we go in reverse this time? We'll start with Danielle.
Yeah, the illegal questions happen. So everybody talks about this, how there are certain types of questions that you're not supposed to be asked legally when you're on an interview. But they did happen for me, and I'd heard the stories and I was like, no, there's no way that happens. But I was in the office of a fairly well-known, almost emeritus professor who saw the wedding ring on my finger and said, "Oh, I see you have a wedding ring. What does your husband do?" And so I think it took me by surprise because I just didn't think it was going to happen. I was like, there's no way that even in this day and age that people will still ask this. So, I mean, I rolled with it. I was in a position where I was able to do that. But I think that was one of the biggest surprises for me. And it didn't happen only at one institution. So it happened at a couple of places. So just kind of be prepared for how you might react if that happens.
Helen?
I think for me, the one thing that I found the most surprising was that my life continued moving. So we're so focused on the interview, that, you have this one track, but the rest of your life is still moving and there are things that are going on in the rest of your life. You need to make sure to sort of balance that during your faculty interview as well. And I think coming in, I was, pretty tunnel vision. I was just going to do faculty interviews, and then stuff came up and have to think about the whole picture, and that sort of to me. I was like, oh, faculty applications are already really hard. There can't be anything worse that could be piled on, but things can happen.
Nick?
Oh. All right. Yeah. So I'll give two answers. I think the biggest surprise during my interview was there are a couple of places where I thought I had an offer and it never materialized. So I think in some cases you'll probably be advised it's not formal until you actually get the letter. And that actually did happen to me. So that was a big surprise for my interview. Now that I've been on the other side of the table a few times, the biggest surprise I have of the whole interview process is that once you get into the stage where you're invited for an in-person interview, those departments, I've been shocked how much time they invest in trying to find the right person, the right match. We've had sessions where people are really reading in detail the papers that you might have and thinking about the contributions and just putting a lot of time into trying to figure out. And it makes sense because they're making such a big investment in this person. But it's a lot. I've seen a lot of effort being put into trying to give people like a fair consideration and a really thorough examination of those final candidates.
So I think I'm the fourth one. Three quick things. The first is to build off of what Danielle was saying earlier about the student meetings. Do not think that that's going to be a break in your day, because they ask really tough questions and they demand very clear answers, such as your funding plan, and you need to describe that to them, and you don't really know what they know about funding. The second surprise was in some on-site interviews, they set up meetings with facilities. So they were schools that were being really proactive to understand like the space needs that you would have. And so you start to talk about like electrical requirements, and that's not something I necessarily prepared for the interviews. And then the third thing, what was the third thing? I was building off of what Nick was just saying. Oh, the letters. When you do get to the stage where you're fielding letters, every school handles their letters differently. I had one school that the first draft of the letter was very close to like their final offer, and other schools where it was very much an evolving document. And so just be flexible and try to ask a lot of questions to figure out how much tunability you have when you get to that stage.
Yep. So what do you have as far as one piece of advice for people interviewing virtually as well as in person? Because, but let's just, it could happen both ways this year. I mean, probably not this year, but in the next 3 years. So we'll start with Helen.
For virtual, I would say to stand up when you're giving your seminar, because I think it gives it more movement and it's more natural to be presenting standing up rather than sitting. But I am sitting right now. And then if it was in person, I think Danielle was saying it's very fun. The interview takes a lot of energy. Me, I pack things that would make me very comfortable, like chamomile tea and like slippers and stuff like that. And it sort of made me feel like home, which allowed me to sleep for the next day, because you're just so high, you're riding very high and a lot of energy, but you're really tired, but you can't sleep. So you sort of need some treats for yourself in the evening.
Nick?
Yeah, so I think one of the easiest tricks you can do that will help a lot are, and you might have heard from Denise's talk earlier, preprints can be really valuable to let people see some work that might not be totally ready for submission. And also your website, making sure that looks good, is quickly readable, up to date. Even if you're in person, I think both of those things can help a lot. Also, maybe for the way you approach these interviews. So you've heard from Laura, from Helen, that it can be really fun. These are really exciting conversations that you get to have with people that could be collaborators. So I'd recommend if you treat the interview as like a learning opportunity and go into it not just trying to win the interview, but also having fun, learning new things, enjoying yourself. Maybe that perspective you'll be happier and could come off more positively if you think of it that way.
Yeah. Laura?
I think my main tip of advice, if I can only give one, I think applies the same for virtual or in person, comes to the Chalk Talk, where you have the closed door presentation to the department about your independent research plan. There, you're going to be well prepared for that. And what I learned sort of through the process was that it's very much, presenting your ideas and getting feedback, but then it's also managing the discussion. So within that time period, it's critical that you hit the main points that you want to hit. You also mention your teaching plan. So there's a lot of management that goes into fielding questions, answering questions, and moving the conversation where you want it to go.
I think I'm last. My advice is going to build exactly off of what Nick had said, and that this is really a learning opportunity for the interview, both for the department and for you. So not only do first impressions matter, but your ability to suss out the information that you need to make a decision on whether or not it's a good fit for you is just as important. And so that means asking a lot of questions, right? And that's kind of how you can help drive those one-on-one conversations you have during the interviews. So I would ask questions like, what does this institution value in a tenure case? Or how are students assigned to advisors? Or what is the process for reappointment and tenure and things like that? And you ask those questions to multiple people so that you can kind of collect and get a broad profile of what are you actually walking into if this is the job that you ultimately get and take. If you have the time for if you're on an in-person interview, it also doesn't hurt to do some research of the living situation in the town as well. So if I would fly in early enough, I would go take a walk in the afternoon, and maybe that can become a conversation piece. And I can ask about, different aspects of the town when I was there. So it's kind of showing both that you're genuinely interested in the place that you're visiting, and that you're trying to learn as much as possible about it in this compressed amount of time.
Great. So I'm now going to move over to a lot of the questions that have been entered on Slido. Some of them are super fast. So first super fast one, how many reference letters did you submit? And also I'm going to tack on who wrote them. So we'll start with Danielle.
I had 3 to 4 letters for all of my applications. I had my PhD advisor, my postdoc advisor, one assistant professor who I had collaborated with a lot during my PhD. So he was on my defense committee. I do experiments, he does simulations. And then my 4th letter writer was somebody who I had run an outreach program with. So I had started a program for women interested in academic jobs at Illinois during my PhD, and he was kind of the faculty advisor for that. So he wrote my 4th letter.
Got it. Helen?
I had 3 to 4 as well. It was my PI, my postdoc advisor, PhD advisor, collaborator, and that I worked for between undergraduate and my PhD. So I took 2 years off.
Got it. Laura?
I had 3 letters, 1 for my my PhD thesis advisor, and then 2 for my postdoctoral advisors.
Nick?
And I had my PhD advisor, my postdoc career mentor and program mentor, and then my postdoc technical mentor.
Great. So 2 of you have kind of started your assistant professorhood, and 2 of you are starting your assistant professorhood. What kind of things have you found successful in doing the either starting part or the started part? And we'll start with Laura. And why don't we limit it to two things?
2 things. Writing early, writing grant proposals really early, like before you start your job. That's important because you'll get feedback and you'll get better. And the second thing is have discussions with your colleagues. I think that was the critical point, is really to get integrated in the culture, have coffees, stay late at the faculty meeting to hear what people are chatting about, really integrate yourself into those personal conversations, which ultimately is you're going to build your career on within the department.
I was going to say we'll go to Nick and then we'll loop back.
So I think my biggest mistake when I started was I didn't successfully recruit first grad students or postdocs my first year. So I had no staff the first year and a half-ish. So I think I would have been more successful if I was able to get some people that looking at my time, like the output that I had per hour in my first year versus the other years where you have the students, the staff. It was a big jump when you have the researchers.
Helen?
I think the first thing I did was sort of connect with everyone. And one of the things she said was to make sure your management system or data organization was sort of one of my first priorities. I sort of figured out how are we going to store data and how am I going to manage the group. So I spent a lot of time setting something called Airtable up. It's like Trello. So it's just a way
Helen, you're muted.
Yeah, Helen, you just got muted.
Oh, I was done. That's why I muted myself just now.
Oh, okay. 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 There.
Yeah, so I guess let's see. This is about things that are going well. I started in the middle or right before the pandemic hit, so it's kind of a weird thing. But I guess one thing is, it's one thing that has been working for me is figuring out which things it's okay to say no to, and like starting that from day one. So there are certain student requests, so I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do that one, and it suddenly makes my life a lot better. So I advise you to keep an eye out for those opportunities all the time. And then the other thing is just to kind of learn how long it takes to do things. So I've been teaching. So this is my second quarter that I'm teaching right now. And I'm kind of getting into a flow of how long it takes me to prep lectures and things like that and balance that with what I want to do in my research lab. So just kind of keep an eye on those things so you can use that information to plan out your own schedule.
I'm muted now. Okay. So for those of us who are just starting to feel tired by our academic journeys, can you speak to the myth that one needs to work all the time as an assistant professor to get tenure? How many hours do you or did you work during the different phases of assistant professorhood? So we'll start with Nick, and then Laura, and then Danielle, and then Helen.
So one thing to keep in mind is that I think you hear and you feel when you're in the application process that this is like it's all consuming. Unfortunately, I feel like that's also the job you're signing up for. So it didn't change much the amount of work through the phases. But I do step away and draw a line for how much work I'll do. So I'm typically working around 50 hours a week. And that's similar to what I was doing as a postdoc.
Laura?
So I think this gets to like work-life balance, and a colleague of mine, I don't know that he coined the phrase, I don't know where it came from, is to have life balance. And so to recognize that everyone's work style, balancing their personal lives that are outside of science, right, is going to look different for everyone. And so what's helped me is that I track now every minute that I work, and I identify what I'm doing so that I can figure out what am I spending way too much time on that I need to be more efficient at, and what am I neglecting. That's really helpful. In terms of numbers for me, my baseline is, it varies from 40 to 80. I'll give it that.
Yeah, I do the same thing that Laura does. So I have this like time tracking thing. I'm trying to be careful not to flip it so that this task doesn't get switched. And I use that to keep track of the exact same things that Laura just talked about. I average around 50 hours, but I think the range is 40 to like 65 for me. I know for myself personally, once I go beyond 65, my productivity drops way down. So if I start to creep up closer to that number, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not getting much done now. And so I'm just going to take some personal time if that happens. But I think finding the way, like molding your schedule around your own life is really important. I've discovered like I'm a night person. I can only write late at night. My husband plays video games at that time with his friends, so it works out really well for us. And it's very consistent with the way I used to work when I was younger. Like when I was an undergrad student, it was always at night that I was doing my PSETs. So that has just sort of persisted for me. I think as far as how have my hours changed through the years, it was probably a little bit higher during my postdoc years because I was actually like actively in the lab running experiments. So maybe not doing as much deep thought work and more just getting stuff done and trying to be productive. But in my grad school years, probably also averaging around 50 hours a week.
So I'm a little bit closer to the 40 hours a week. So that's something that I aim for. And part of that was because when I was a postdoc, I was commuting. So sort of come in and then end my day. And that's sort of what I'm also aiming for right now. And we'll see how that goes. But part of the way that I was able to achieve this so far is just sort of being very selective about how I spend my time. So I haven't tracked it. I like that thing that Danielle and Laura brought up. But sometimes things can look very appealing, and I was like, oh, do I want to spend that extra 10 hours to work on this grant, or just decide to just focus on these grants over here? And so that was sort of a hard decision, because you sort of feel like you should apply to every grant. But right now I'm being very selective about how I spend my time.
So if I would like to land a tenure track assistant professorship at a research institution, then as a PhD student, what percentage of work should I focus on research and publications, service work, teaching, and mentoring? And thank you for your insights and tips, smiley face. So we'll start with Helen.
I think everyone has their own idea of what a professorship should be. For me, I think publications and doing science and getting trained is a big part, but equally important is service and mentorship for me. So I spent quite a larger amount of my time on that, and I think it will actually be very beneficial as a professor, because we spend a lot of time managing people, organizing symposiums. So actually, I think if you spent more time on mentorship and service, it will actually pay off when you become a professor. I would say maybe 50, maybe 60% research for me, and then 30% mentorship or so, and then 10% of service for my postdoc.
Laura?
Sorry, I lost my window. I think the question was coming from a current graduate student, right? So I, as a grad student, I focused entirely on research with some mentoring. I had no teaching experience formally as a graduate student. And what I've learned, and I think maybe is true for every career, is that you just need to be ready to learn. So I think whoever asked the question is a step ahead of where I was, because they're thinking in terms of research, service, and teaching, and I only thought about research. So I think there's many ways to be successful, is my point, is that if you don't have teaching experience, that doesn't mean you can't get a teaching position. I also had interviews at teaching undergraduate, primarily teaching universities. So just be prepared to learn and show whoever you're applying to that you're ready to learn and you're a capable learner. And I think you can be successful in landing a position.
Okay. I'm going to start skipping, not asking all of you everything, because we have a lot. What advice would you give to a student who has a bachelor's degree in biology and a PhD in bioengineering, but would like to search for a position in a bioengineering department, or in general for people who change fields, basically science to engineering or vice versa? So I'm going to go with Helen to start this one.
I had this problem a little bit between chemistry and chemical engineering. So I was doing both throughout my undergraduate and my postdocs. I always felt like I was both. And so I tried to make things, when I was presenting to a chemistry department, I would make engineering. I would focus on like the device fabrication, and so it's the same program, but I highlight on different areas. So if you're applying to bioengineering or whatever, you need to figure out what are the standard metrics for those programs, and sort of find aspects of your proposal to focus on. You can't make separate proposals for different departments. That's what I was going to do at first, and it was just too much work. So I have the same proposal and just sort of pick apart what you can highlight.
And then Nick also did the same swap. He has a very disciplined, diverse background. So Nick?
Yeah. So you're trying to convince the department that you have really high potential. So it's fine to change fields, but you do need to convince people that you can do well in the new field. So for me, my PhD was more on the physics and optics side. I did some entrepreneurship and started a company that was in medical devices. And then for my research plan, when I was applying for jobs, it was more about artificial intelligence and medical devices. So I think I could bring in some of that previous experience into the story for how I could become unique in this area. And then I just had some papers, some ideas that I think could convince people that I could do something in this new field. But I don't see it as a big issue as long as you have enough to show your kind of state of the art and can do well in that new field is the most important part.
So we have a couple questions almost on the logistics of interviewing, and also on the logistics of interviewing, comparing United States versus Canada. So Helen, would you feel comfortable just kind of handling all of that? Okay, take it away.
Oh, how it was different from Canada. I felt that the interview, in terms of interviewing in Canada and the US, were nearly the same. The variations between the schools were the same as the variations between the US schools. I think the difference will come in when you negotiate your startup package. So in the US, you get a set number of money, but in Canada, you get some startup fund. And a lot of it is tied to something called a CFI GEL fund. And so you have to apply for this amount of money for all your infrastructure. And it's not guaranteed, but it's somewhat guaranteed because that money is tied to how much is given per school, and each school can allocate a certain amount. So it's almost guaranteed, but it does require an extra step in terms of figuring out how much you can afford. And it felt really annoying at the beginning, but because I had to apply to it, I had to figure out all my finances of how much am I going to spend on all the machines and how much will they actually cost. So now I feel like I have a good forecast of like how much my startup money I should spend for glassware, or how much I should spend on travel, and all that was something that was a really good exercise because of the CFI, but it was a little bit annoying. But in terms of interviewing, I felt like, besides talking about the startup package, was very similar.
Laura, could you maybe give like an overview of exactly what happens during the interview? Like, pretend you're talking to someone who's never applied for a faculty position and has no idea what that process is.
So you're gonna submit your application. You want to submit it early. If there's a technical conference that occurs before the deadline, you want to go to that conference. You want to talk. You want to promote yourself. The next stage is typically, there may be a phone or Zoom interview. Some go straight to the campus interview. So a campus interview is you arrive in the evening, you go to dinner, you have, they take you back to the hotel, you try to sleep, you wake up and you have a full day of meetings. So this are individual faculty meetings, 30 minutes long, student meetings, they'll tour you around, you'll give a seminar, and either, typically you give the seminar first, and either later that afternoon, you'll give your chalk talk, which is the closed door, describe your research plan, or that occurs on a second day. So plan for at least 2 dinners. So dinner when you arrive, at least a full day, and then typically part of a second day of faculty meetings, possibly the research presentation, and then travel. I think that covers.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I found going on interviews is that departments are really grateful if you're willing to be flexible with that schedule. So sometimes there are last minute changes. I had one interview where it was like the middle of the polar vortex. And so the building, like I couldn't enter because one of the emergency sprinklers went off since it froze shut. So they had to like totally swap my schedule around. But if you're willing to like roll with that and kind of adapt to those circumstances, that demonstrates like your ability to be an adaptable PI as well. So that's just something that will help. And every single interview is going to be different. And so don't necessarily expect a certain set course as you go through. The other thing is that after the interview, I found it was really important to write thank you notes to the people who I spoke with, just as a reflection for myself to get a sense of like, how did I feel about the department? How were my conversations with all the people who I spoke with? And to just kind of give myself another opportunity to follow up on any discussions that were still lingering. So I do recommend doing that after both virtual and in-person interviews.
So we're going to start with Helen on this question. When considering locations for a postdoc, should we consider where we ultimately would like to apply for a faculty position? And if so, how? In other words, would being a postdoc at an institution be a disadvantage or an advantage in future applications to the same place? And then I would also like to kind of tack on to this already multi-part question. How would topic also play a role? So not just geographic, but also technical topics. So like what consideration should go in to choosing a postdoc?
In terms of choosing your postdoc, my impression is that typically you want to go to an institution that won't be where you will be a faculty at, because you're going for your training to become, to gather all this information and bring it to a new place. And so there's an exchange of information that could happen that's very powerful. So typically I would do a postdoc somewhere that I would not want to be a faculty at. But I think that could change, especially if you are in Europe, that those metrics aren't necessarily the same. And then what I think where you choose your postdoc could also depend on your partner situation and whether you can leverage that location in order to get the position you want. But I think that's really, you're trying to make a lot of predictions about where you think you'll get a job, but that's completely random. Like I had a different set of expectations of like, oh, I want to be here, here, here. And then I'm like over here. I wasn't expecting that at all. So I think you should pick somewhere that you think you'll grow and learn at, but not necessarily where you want to be forever.
Anyone else like to chime in?
Yeah, I can add in. So at many medical schools where a professorship might be mostly soft money, you might tend to find those more often recruit people from within because they might not have to make as big of an investment in transitioning from someone from a postdoc or senior researcher to a tenure track. So at Hopkins, we see people in my department and others going from postdoc to tenure track faculty at the same place. And I've seen that at a few medical centers.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to a recently posted question that I think is on everyone's mind. How many applications did you submit and how many interviews did they lead to? And then there was another one posted previously. And if you do, in parentheses, and if you don't mind revealing, how many offers did you get? So I leave the last part in parentheses up to you. I can start this discussion just for transparency. I applied to 45 positions. I did this in 2007, which was a similar economic time. Even though I applied to that many positions, by the time they were actually interviewing, a lot of those positions were no longer actually positions. They had been removed. I had 8 interviews and I got 7 offers. One of the interviews I got also vaporized. So it was no longer a thing. But yes, so that was my path. So who would like to go next?
I don't know. I can go next. I don't know that I have as good a memory of the raw numbers, but I had applied to somewhere close to 20 schools. So I think everyone should try to cast a wide net because you don't know where you're going to end up or where the best fit could be. I went on 8 or 9 interviews. And at the end, I was actually still doing like extra virtual interviews while I was sort of fielding the offers that I was deciding between. So I ended up deciding between 2 offers.
I can go next. I applied to 40, so similar magnitude as what Andrea had applied to. I was invited to 18 interviews. I think I went on 15. It was a lot, so I don't recommend doing quite that many interviews. I walked away with 10 offers at the end of it, and it was across multiple types of departments, so not just chemical engineering, which was my background.
For me, I think I probably applied to 40 or 50 this was in 2014, 2015-ish. So there are maybe 10 that I put a lot of effort into, like customizing, and then another group that I just sent without a lot of investment. Interestingly, the position I'm at now was one that I didn't put a lot of time into. And I got, I think, 4 phone calls that turned into 3 on-campus interviews and 2 offers.
So I applied to 40 or 45 schools in chemistry and chemical engineering and material science. So a lot of the schools ended up overlapping, but a total of around that many applications. And they were very targeted locations in the US because of my partner. And so there were some schools that I don't think were a good fit, but they were the right location. So there were a lot of those on my list. And I think I interviewed around 10 schools. I think I had more Skype calls. I don't remember how many Skype calls we had, but 10 like in-person interviews. And then I had to cancel a lot of engineering interviews because the chemistry timeline is before engineering. And so I didn't feel like it was fair if I already found something that I liked to continue interviewing. So I thought it was best to decline those. And then in the end, I got 4 written offers.
Okay. So do you have any tips on preparing for the chalk talk? How much material, time, slides, etc. should one prepare? How often is one interrupted during the talk? And do faculty try to ask gotcha questions? So I'm going to just let Danielle and Helen answer this because they just did this. So we'll start with Danielle.
Yeah, I think I had, let's see. So I think I had maybe 15 slides. From my experience, people are really interested in understanding what your vision is. So what is the big picture that kind of drives how you choose the research questions that you'll go after? And then you can talk about maybe 2 or 3 research projects that fit in the line of questioning that fits that overall vision. So I spent, the first portion just kind of outlining what will my group look like, and then I dove into the project. So I didn't get too many questions until I started to dive into project 1. Project 1 took roughly 20 to 30 minutes to talk about in every single chalk talk that I did. So that was where there were a lot of questions about how will this actually work? What will the first students' papers look like? What are the first experiments in the lab? Are you about some of these numerical ranges that you're identifying? Can you add more detail there? So I think there's just a lot of questions, both on the detailed side and the high level side. Like the range of questioning was pretty amazing. And then once we got through that first project, everyone was like, okay, that's fine. And then the second and third projects were a little bit faster. So I only had 2 slides for the second and third projects, whereas my first project I had 4 or 5 slides for to expand on. And then I finished with a teaching slide at the end, which you do want to tailor for that specific department. Was there more to that question?
No, I think that was it. Helen?
I'll just add that I noticed that engineering slides there's like a less number of slides for engineering chalk talk. So I'll see maybe 20 slides, but then for chemistry ones tend to be a lot longer. And so I actually was sort of in between. I had around maybe 40 slides, but they're very simple slides. And like what Danielle said was the vision was really important, and not that many people really interrupted me of like, this is what I want my group to be. And then the first proposal was the one that had the most questions, like all these nitpicky questions, but also high level questions. And actually, when I wrote my proposal, I had proposal A, B, C, but when I presented the proposals, I actually presented proposal B first, because I felt that it captured many aspects of my vision. So it tied in really nicely. And then I sort of switched the order, and I didn't think that was a problem. And then did a second and third proposal, and I was able to sort of time that based on how much time was left. And then I actually closed with like, why do I want to go to the school? And that was pretty useful for my own research, because I was trying to analyze, like, do I want to go to the school? And so I might as well put all of that on a slide as a summary for myself. And it also shows the school like, oh, I'm interested in the school for ABC reasons. And then I had a teaching slide, and I had 2 teaching slides and then an outreach slide as well. And those were really flexible in terms of filling up time. If I wrapped up really quickly in my proposal chalk talk, then I spent a lot of time talking about teaching and outreach and my vision for that. And then if I didn't have as much time, I was able to squeeze it all in 5 minutes.
Okay. So what are the things you see apart from locations to find the right fit at an institution? So we're going to start with Nick on this one, because he said that, he actually didn't put that much effort into his Hopkins application, which kind of indicates, at least to me, that maybe he didn't see that institution as being initially like the perfect fit. So how did you determine that, that was your perfect fit?
Yeah, so it's I would approach it with an open mind. We had a few answers earlier on about the importance of meeting the students in the interview. For me, meeting the students during my interview at Hopkins really blew me away and made me want to come here, just because they're so sharp, so engaged, and imagining myself working with those grad students was really appealing to me. So I think the conversations you'll have, not just with the faculty, but the students, can help you get a sense of if it's a good place for you. And there was just a combination of things. It was a better fit for my wife. There was a two-body issue that made me lean towards Hopkins in the end. And it was one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that my position was kind of unique, because a big reason they recruited me here was to teach this capstone design program, which in a lot of places in a teaching track faculty might organize. So it's a heavy teaching load, and that ended up being a good fit with my industry background and entrepreneurship. So it was a combination of everything, and so I'd encourage you to apply broadly and explore these places that you might not have in your top 3 places in the world to live right now.
Why don't we go to Danielle?
Yeah, so this question is about fit and how it okay. So I think for me, the fit was largely on like gaps in expertise within the department. So there were a few departments that I had interviewed with that were specifically looking for someone in experimental soft matter, and one of the hidden gaps. So that it's not publicly advertised, like it's just among the list of many things that they're looking for in their job descriptions. But there's kind of a historical precedent where I knew that they had been interviewing a number of people in that area over the past few years, and I think, in some cases continued to do so. So if you can kind of suss out from your field specific areas, which departments might be looking to strengthen or fill a gap, that would be really important. Another thing for me was to look at mentorship. So would there be a mentor in my field who could help me navigate how to gain credibility and how to just deal with the tenure process once I got a position? Did that person exist in this different type of department? And in some departments that wasn't necessarily true, whereas in other departments there were 2 or 3 mentors who could help with that.
Laura?
And in terms of, I'm going to answer your question from the perspective of, should I take this job because it's a good fit for me, not necessarily for, it is for the department if they're giving you an offer. So ultimately, the way that I identified to go to UMass based on the fit was sort of to build off of what Nick and Danielle have said is, the student questions in your seminar, how engaging they are. That's a really good metric for how engaging the students will be in class and in research. And so that blew me away. And then sort of the fit for me was having significant enough overlap to be able to talk the same language as colleagues, but balancing that with the opportunity to uniquely collaborate and bring something new. Those were two things that were critical to fit. And I agree with Danielle's comment on mentorship. Within my department, we kind of span actually 3 disciplines that are core to polymer science. And so for me, I knew that I would have a mentor in the 3 unique fields who were prominent in the different conferences and would be able to guide me in wherever my independent research took me.
Great. Helen?
Yeah, so in addition to everything, I felt like the interactions with the other faculty were played a big role in what was a good fit for me. Did I feel like I had people I can talk to who were younger PIs, but also senior PIs who could be my mentors? And do I have a place in the department where I'm not overlapping in terms of research? But yet there's a lot of other collaborators. So I want a lot of medical collaborators, and so having a hospital and all those were sort of important metrics for me. And so I wanted a place where I felt comfortable to speak up in faculty meeting, and I have, and I thought that was something you can sort of pull out if in the conversations. If you felt comfortable during the chalk talk or whatever to express your thoughts, then this might be a good fit for you. And in addition to that, I really look at equipment and what sort of facilities are there for my research, because it is very equipment heavy. And so I asked a lot about the other facilities and other equipments that are shared among the department and also the university. Those were in addition to what everyone else said.
So I want to close on this idea of fit and applications and fit. So I know that both Helen and Nick applied to departments and got offers in departments that did not necessarily align with their, super clean degree programs. And Danielle and Laura, in contrast, are, kind of in their really clean degree program lineage. Side note, I'm not. I'm a chemie professor and I have no degrees in chemie. But did you apply to other departments, Laura and Danielle, that were outside of your chemie lineage? Also, did you feel comfortable doing so? Right, because this is one of those discussion points of, if they're asking for someone doing, cell biology and you do molecular biology, should you just give up and not bother? Or should you apply anyway and cross your fingers and maybe they'll think what you're doing is super awesome? So we'll start with Laura.
So, if you think that you can fit in any small way into a job posting, you should apply. So you should apply everywhere. I did apply. I started with chemies because chemies have this, conference and this whole big faculty search thing. And there were heads of searches in other programs that were trying to also see the first round of chemies at that conference. And so from there, I applied to many, many different programs. My current position was actually advertised. They were looking for someone with specialties in polymer physics. And in some ways, like my research, of course, touches on polymer physics. It's in all of polymer science. And so I didn't think I was the perfect fit, but I definitely have overlapping themes. And so I applied and, got the position. And my independent research has also gone way more into polymer physics than I might have thought when I was a PhD student. So you never know where you're going to go. So apply everywhere that you might have an overlap.
Let's continue with Danielle.
Yeah, I'll echo that sentiment to apply everywhere where you might have overlap. If you're tailoring applications, each extra application you tailor takes probably 30 minutes to an hour. And when you've spent 100 hours on your research proposal, that extra 30-minute delta is not that bad. And then let's see, as far as, I applied to other departments. I was primarily chemical engineering, but I applied to some material science. And then I was invited to apply to a chemistry department because they were looking for somebody in my area. So that invitation actually came after the deadline. It was an unusual circumstance where I had applied to that chemistry department and they said, you're not a good fit in our department, but we know that chemistry is looking at our institution. And so we encourage you to apply there. So that I did consider offers from different departments. I think at the very end, the opportunity to come to a chemical engineering department where I felt it was a good fit with colleagues was exciting and felt safer, but I was very, very close to not taking a chemical engineering offer because I work at this interdisciplinary interface. So now that I'm in a chemistry department, I do feel most comfortable here in terms of the teaching duties and my ability to teach pretty much any class that we offer, which would not have been true had I joined one of the other departments. But we, as Laura had said, we learn how to learn and we're fast learners. And so I think I would have picked it up just fine if I ended up somewhere else.
Helen?
Yeah, I think I would have felt pretty comfortable in chemistry or chemical engineering. And so actually at Toronto, I just became cross-appointed after the fact. Yeah, I think if I was in the mechanical engineering department, that would have been less comfortable for me in terms of teaching the course, but probably could have learned to figure it out as well. But I think in terms of my program, I wanted to be in a chemistry department because I knew that at the beginning, most of my students would be synthetically focused. And so being in a chemical engineering department would have been a little bit more difficult to attract the right students.
And Nick?
Yeah, so I was applying to a variety of places. The places I ended up getting offers from were three different areas. There was an optics institute, an electrical engineering department, and a BME department. And so in the BME department, I think what happened, so you heard from Helen earlier about the importance of communicating your vision and convincing people this is an important area of the future. And so it's important to have that, but what happens, I think, in most cases is that your vision and the strengths of the place that you might go to kind of merge together and build off of each other. So if you get to the point where you're trying to decide which place to go, you probably don't want to think that you're going to just do exactly what you have in mind identically at all of these places. If you go to a place that's in a different department, that's probably going to steer you and lead to opportunities to have branches in that direction. So think about your vision, but also how that might be bent by the department you join if you're looking at different programs.
Great. And I'm going to give each of you, a minute or two to kind of give some advice to all the postdocs and grad students who are actually applying or will be applying in the next year or two. But at the start of each of your piece of advice, can you please answer one last question, which is, how did you find your current position, right? Did you use like Nature Careers, word of mouth, a friend? So why don't we start with Danielle?
Sure. So for my current position, this one was a word of mouth posting that went through a bunch of email listservs. I think I was emailed 5 times from 5 different people, but I used Google Jobs a lot for a lot of the other ones. And then, as you're applying, I just want to encourage you that, you don't have to have a one cycle thing. So persist, right? And make sure that when you're applying, think about how do you get whichever job and career you end up in to match your interest and your strengths, right? And so how do you propose a research program or a teaching program that really align with what you're interested in and what you're good at, and capitalize off of those together in order to find your next position.
Helen?
So for chemistry, all the listings are in ChemJobber. And then for the chemical engineering and material science listings, I was really focused on certain cities. So I went to, I had friends who shared listings with me, but I actually went to the specific schools and looked in the 3 departments, chemistry, chemical engineering, and material science for particular schools because I had a 2-person issue. And then I think piece of advice would be to really, for the teaching and DEI statements, really reflect on what is meaningful to you. And I think many people could dismiss those letters, but I actually found it really fulfilling to sort of reflect and think about, like, why do I want to become a professor instead of a staff scientist? And it's those key letters, those key statements. When I was writing, it really came out, and I felt really proud of those two statements. And I think it will pay off later when you actually start your job and you have these teaching philosophy and vision laid out as well. And then another advice would be just be organized with all your application process. So keep track of which ones you've submitted and which ones you haven't yet.
Nick?
Yeah, so my position I found, I think just from the department website, it's not very organized, I think, in BME. So you find them in listservs, journals, and sometimes just on department websites. For maybe my closing piece of advice, so when you get to the point where you're interviewing, you're trying to pick a school, I'd really encourage you to try to optimize for your happiness, and maybe not just have the ability to exactly do your research plan as the end all be all for how you make your decision. So if your spouse wants to go somewhere, or you want to be able to surf where you work, or whatever it might be, close to family, I think you should really weigh those heavily in your decision, because you want to be happy with what you're doing, and I think often that can lead that's going to catalyze your ability to do better research.
Great. Laura?
So I found my current position. I had seen the posting through one of the emails from the conference future faculty listservs. And then the department head at the time came up and handed me a physical copy of the posting and said, we want to see your application. And so then I prioritized it to join PSE. My tip of advice for people going through the process now is to, plan it out, be organized, but really make sure that you're excited about what you're proposing for your independent research. Because for me, that's what kept me motivated to, get on the next flight, right? Get off the flight, do laundry, and then get back on, and really keep the enthusiasm, because I was really excited about what I was going to propose. So be passionate about your research, and then organize to make the process, happen start to finish.
Awesome. So thank you very much for your time over this past hour. I really appreciate it, especially all of your thoughts. And good luck to everybody who's stayed with us, and good luck getting faculty offers. We're going to move on to the next panel in 2 minutes, so don't log off. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks for organizing.
Thanks
Bye.
for having us, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.